Good morning, and welcome to Taking Farm Salmon Off the Table: Why, What, and How. I'm Shonda, campaign lead for Off the Table, and today we'll be talking about how together we can reduce the negative impacts of open net salmon farming through the choices we make in what we serve and eat. Before I introduce our fine and illustrious panel, who I'm sure will talk passionately and in more detail about why we need to take farm salmon off all of our tables, here are the headlines of the harms of open net salmon farming. Firstly, open net salmon farming harms the environment and reduces biodiversity. Wild Atlantic salmon, is on the brink of extinction in the UK, and that's partly because escaped farm salmon spread disease and reduced survival of wild fish by interbreeding with the wild fish. Open net farms release harmful chemicals, medicines, and waste into the sea, which has a terrible effect on a range of marine wildlife. Secondly, it's just not sustainable, regardless of what the labels and certification schemes might try to tell you. We are draining overfished seas to feed farm salmon, and in fact bulldozing rainforests to grow soy for fish food as well. 90% of the fish used could and maybe should be used to feed people directly. And using this wild fish threatens the very survival of communities who rely on them for food and jobs across the world. And thirdly, it provides poor welfare. Salmon farming is an intensive practice with fish crammed into net cages. Over 25% and probably more of Scottish farm salmon can die before they are ready for market. And these crowded cages spread disease and pollute the water, which harms wild fish too. I could add a lot more detail and put additional points under all of these headings, but I'm sure what you really want to hear from is the panel. So without further ado, I'm honoured and delighted that giving their perspectives on these issues today are Lloyd Morse, Geeti Singh Watson, Wendy Barry, Caroline Bennett, and Nick Underdown. Lloyd is a chef and co-owner of the Palmerston. Originally from just outside Sydney, Lloyd spent more than 10 years cooking in top London restaurants, including the River Cafe, Magdalen, Primeur, and Spring. He then moved to Edinburgh and worked as a chef in the likes of Timber Yard, Good Brothers, and the Free Company before opening the Palmerston with business partner James Snowden in 2021. At the Palmerston, he champions whole animal cookery and local produce, offering daily changing menu that celebrates the best and freshest produce available on that day. He, along with all of our guest panelists, is an ambassador for UK charity Wildfish's Off the Table campaign, launched in 2022 to encourage UK restaurants to take farm salmon off their menus. Welcome, Lloyd.
Thank you very much.
Geeti's fourth pub, the Bull Inn and Albatross in Totnes, the fourth organic pub indeed, opened in November 2019. Radical and sustainable to its core, the 13-bedroom inn is a beacon of hope for sustainable hospitality. Everything has been thought through for minimal environmental impact, from reclaimed furniture, upcycled curtains, to organic linens and locally crafted lamps, but not a hothouse or imported flour in sight. There are no claims of perfection, though. Instead, the business is run with open ears, always seeking to improve. And it's not just for travellers, it's for everyone: the community, the suppliers, the customers, and staff. Owner Geeti Singh Watson is the founder of the first official organic pub in Britain in 1998, the Duke of Cambridge in Islington, London. After working in the restaurant trade for several years, she was horrified by the wastefulness that she witnessed. Food was regularly thrown away, nothing was recycled, and seasonal eating was unheard of. Geeti was determined to combine her passion for pubs and food and set up the Duke as a business that could thrive without harming the environment, bringing delicious organic food to its customers and educating them about organics, sustainable living, and seasonal eating. 15 years before anyone thought twice about wasteful plastic or damaging business practices, Geeti led the charge of sustainable hospitality, banning plastic water bottles, packaged bar snacks, and air-freighted food back in the 1990s. In 2009, she was awarded MBE for services to the organic pub trade and has been named Businesswoman of the Year, Asian Woman of Achievement, and Entrepreneur of the Year. An active campaigner and environmentalist, Geeti firmly believes that businesses must act responsibly and be led by their ethics and values. We're delighted to have you here today, Geeti.
Thank you very much. Slightly embarrassing sitting and listening to you say that, especially if I wrote it. Thank you, though.
Thank you. Wendy is a cook, food writer, and campaigner for local sustainable produce and biodiversity. She is founder of the award-winning Scottish Food Guide with its own food charter, along with Scottish Cheese Trail and Scottish Farm Shops. Wendy is also a member of ICAT Global Experts Network and international jury member for European Region of Gastronomy. Leader for Slow Food Arc of Taste and Cooks Alliance in Scotland, Wendy is co-founder of the Scottish Bread Championships and has co-written Meadows, the Swedish Farmer and the Scottish Cook, with her husband, a heritage farmer and gene bank specialist, on regenerative food production, native breeds, and featuring recipes using ethically sourced produce. She runs sustainable food experiences at her Five studio and enjoys the rural backwaters of Småland on the small organic craft. Delighted to have you here, Wendy. Caroline founded Solar Discretion CIC, an ethical fishmonger in Plymouth, to safeguard the livelihoods of small-scale fishers and their marine-friendly fishing methods. Solar Discretion was winner of the Fishing News Fish Processor of the Year Award in 2021. She is also pioneering a participatory guarantee scheme to identify fish caught with low impact on the environment and high social benefits with low-impact fishers of Europe. Caroline is at the forefront of campaigns to protect fish stocks through her work with Slow Fish and Open Seas Trust. She is also the founder of Moshi Moshi Sushi, where she puts these values and knowledge into practice, and we hope to welcome Moshi Moshi as the first UK sushi restaurant to join Off the Table very soon. Welcome, Caroline.
Thank you very much.
I'll try and put my fish back into safe fishes next time. And we have Nick Underdown. Nick oversees Wildfish's work in Scotland, advancing recovery efforts and addressing key pressures on wild fish. A former journalist with a strong interest in corporate environmental and social responsibility, he reported on many national policy issues, including the development of salmon farming and environmental protection. Nick subsequently assisted community-level advocacy with the Community of Arran Seabread Trust and the Clyde River Foundation, before supporting Scottish Environment Link's marine group Don't Take the Pea campaign for a network of well-managed marine protected areas. Before joining Wildfish in October this year, he led strategic campaigns for improving fisheries management and seabed protection for 9 years at Open Seas in Scotland. He is determined to strengthen the links between ecosystem health and community resilience and well-being and address the unsustainable pressures being placed on Scotland's wild salmon and other fish populations. Welcome, Nick.
It's great to be here.
And that is quite enough from me. So now I'm going to invite each of these panelists to speak for a few minutes and then open the floor for questions. I'm sure they'll bring plenty of interesting perspective and information to the conversation. Lloyd, would you like to kick us off first?
Hi everybody, my name is Lloyd. I'm head chef and co-owner of the Palmerston restaurant in Edinburgh, where we feed about between 700 and 1,000 people a week. The food that we cook at the Palmerston is based entirely around well-sourced products. We have a philosophy that Mother Nature does the hard work, we just have to not stuff it up. At the Palmerston, we're committed to whole animal butchery, sourcing directly from farm veg, and working with small shellfish boats for things like crabs, langoustines, and lobsters. The majority of the fish that comes into the restaurant is also within the guidelines of the Marine Conservation Society. We have never, and we never have and never will, served farmed salmon. It was a decision that we never made. I always think it's funny that people say, why did you take salmon off the menu? And it was never even part of the conversation that it was going to be on the menu. I don't think it takes much research to know, as has already been said, that farm salmon is a pretty terrible product. And I hate that we call it a product, let alone for the amount of animals that go through those farms. In the early 2000s, a decision was made to ban caged hens in the UK due to poor animal welfare. And I think this is the exact same argument that we're having now. The current process of salmon farming in the UK is well known for its poor animal welfare and its horrendous environmental impact. I'm not ignorant to the fact that we need to feed 8 billion people that live on this earth. I'm only making my own decisions for my own small business in a corner of Scotland. I'm really excited to be here today, and I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the panel. Thank you for my very short intro. Off to you guys.
Thank you very much, Lloyd. It's sort of interesting in some ways that there was almost no decision for you to make around not serving farmed salmon. There was no conversation to have. It was like it was just a given from the get-go.
Yeah.
So you haven't taken it off the table. You never put it on the table in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd also like to say that while you may feel you're only making the decision for your business in a small corner of Scotland, don't underestimate the ripple effects these small decisions can make. You know, like fractal patterns in nature, the small changes lead to bigger ones and expand outwards. And it's an incredible, powerful force for change, especially when lots of people making those small changes come together, as we're talking about today. So thank you for making that decision in your sphere of influence so we can all join together and spread that wider across the country.
Absolutely.
Geeti, as another very passionate chef restaurateur, I'd love to hear from you next.
Hi, I'm not a chef, I'm front of house. It's funny how all restaurateurs get put in the chef category, but front of house is equally important, isn't it, Lloyd and Caroline? We get it. So I opened my first pub in 1998, and we did start by serving salmon. We started with a very strict fish policy. Actually, we didn't initially start with I started with a fish policy that wasn't strict enough. And a very early journalist wrote an article saying, what a load of bollocks. And it really kicked me into action to sort out my fish policy. And I created a really comprehensive fish policy from there, which initially included organic salmon, because actually restricting your fish purchasing to you were talking about the Marine Conservation Society, the traffic light system is quite complicated. And I needed a fill-in of fish, because if you're actually buying seasonally by the right method, there's times when there is no fish, then that's the quite complicated thing. But in about 2005, when I became a trustee of the Soil Association, it was at that point I took organic salmon off the menu, because when I really went deep into what was happening with organic farm salmon, I realized it really wasn't that much better. It really isn't. I mean, it's the equivalent of, I think it's more a tangible way of feeling it. It's growing organic tomatoes inside a heated greenhouse in the middle of winter in Britain is clearly wrong. And in the same way that just because you've slightly shifted how you're feeding your salmon and changed your stocking size, you're still doing the damage. So that's why I took it off. I actually did some research into organic farm salmon earlier and discovered that all sorts of places claim that organic salmon is fed a vegetarian diet, and it's just crap. It's not possible. So it's like some of the claims are absolutely extraordinary around the greenwash around this subject. So creating a very comprehensive fish policy is the most effective way of dealing with it. So trying to teach your customers that there are different types of fish out there, that they don't have to have cod, salmon, haddock, the standard ones that everyone's eating, prawns. And we as restaurateurs are in an incredibly powerful position to affect that change. So when I first opened the Duke, we had a red mullet, gurnard, pollock coley, and nobody had heard of it. We literally had to explain what these fish were each time to everyone. And within 2 or 3 years, that had changed. All restaurants were starting to shift their behavior. So, and then those fish become endangered as we affect that change. So we have the power to do something incredibly effective. The only form of farming that's really, really going to be powerful is mussel farming, and they create marine reserves. So that's, I think, the mission for restaurants, is to get mussels out there everywhere, constantly on the table, and tell the story of how good mussel farming is in comparison to salmon farming, how damaging that is and how great mussel farming is. There's a local mussel farm here in Devon, and I think they send something like 99, Caroline, can you remember? 95% of the mussels go to Europe. We don't really eat them, but they're right here on the coast, and it's an incredible waste. So my big push for fish on the menu is mussels, but most of all, the biggest push, I think, is method. So it's not species, because you can get a species that's supposedly on the green light list by an appalling method that is still devastating the sea. If you only support method, then we can change the way we fish. We can change the way. I mean, you'd remove the trawlers, you'd remove bottom trawlers. Suddenly you have an entirely different fishing system. And if anyone's watched Ocean, you'll see how incredibly fast the sea can replenish. And that is incredibly exciting. It's much more valuable than land in that sense, because it takes no input, in theory, apart from the fishing boats, to actually grow and produce this food if we manage the oceans properly, and farming is part of what's got to be removed other than mussel farming. Mussel, can I just add one more thing about mussels? They capture carbon and they clean the water. I mean, they are so valuable and really good for us. So mussels it is.
Thank you very much, Geeti. I very much appreciate how you talk about your sort of development and change, how you change your practice over time, and talk about not trying to be perfect straight away. I think that makes it very accessible. I think all too often we can aim for perfection or nothing, and that stops people from making the changes that they can make. You know, that old sort of adage, we need 100 people doing it imperfectly than one people doing it perfectly. Yeah. And that definitely plays a role here. And it always amazes me that as a sort of island nation, how little of our different species of fish that we eat. And that stat about exporting all of our shellfish, because generally it's considered that British people don't like shellfish, is always quite staggering when we have this fantastic resource that's just, you know, resource and wildlife that's sitting there. So thank you for your in praise of mussel farming.
You can also use the shells to fertilize the soil. So, you know, there's anyway, I'll leave you to it.
Maybe we'll come back to talking about mussels later.
Mussels, yeah.
And also you highlighted there that the shortcomings of certification systems, you sort of very sort of, you know, one level thing that you're looking at rather than looking at these things holistically. That drive to simplify, to make it easy for people, actually makes it more complicated in some ways. We lose all that nuance. We lose all of the reality of what makes these choices good choices or not such good choices. So let's shift gears slightly and move to Wendy.
Good morning. Who has mastered the unmute button this time? Good morning. Well, as a professionally trained cook with a keen interest in environment and biodiversity, I didn't have any problem supporting Off the Table. As soon as I heard about it, I thought, yeah, that's for me. And so menu adaptations were never an issue. But as a food writer, my views are not always warmly received, and I can see there is a pressure among food writers, depending on who's paying the piper. And so I think we need to have strength in numbers and be louder and bolder together, because together we can push against that door and push against being othered. So I think the cooks and chefs can really express themselves with the Off the Table campaign, and the writers need to be bold and follow suit. I think the powers that be see closing down the summer farms as being an absolute calamity for the entire economy, especially in Scotland. But I see it as a positive breakthrough. I see it as something that could really change the lives, the communities, and the tourism and the economy of Scotland, particularly around all these marginal lands, which I travel through with my food guide, and there's so much of it underused, unused, wrongly used. And with the right breed, the right varietals, in the right place, at the right density, we could do so much more with that marginal land, with no need for, you know, a dependence on these fish farming corporations. And then the coastal lands would get regeneration and not desecration. And the resultant food production would be vastly better than what we've got now. And if we reclaim Scotland's small-scale fishing and small-scale farming, then we really would be enjoying much healthier, more delicious food. And we really would be a good food nation, supporting delicious produce and healthier communities. And in fact, that's going to be the topic of our next book, something we're going to explore. That really, I see it as a very positive thing to get rid of all this open net farming. But I think some people are just too scared to take that step, but it really is a positive step. And as if the coastal pollution and mortality rates aren't bad enough, I abhor the way they hoover up wild stock. For example, the herring in the Baltic. Even the seals are starving in the Baltic. You know, they've emptied it, and that is an absolute tragedy too. And they're using this fish for fish feed and indeed intensive chicken and pork feed as well. Another contentious issue. And these delicious nutrient-rich fish should be for our table. And we certainly love herring in this house. So I decided to make a stand on Scottish Food Guide and launched my unique charter stating, certainly unique to Scotland. I think Geechies are totally on it, but nobody else was, putting their head above the sandbags in Scotland. Stating sustainable and ethical standards expected of my members. And at the same time, I at that point removed all salmon smokeries from the guide and contacted each one personally to explain why. And this has been very well received and particularly commented on among my colleagues on the European mainland. Scotland's a bit quiet about it, but in Europe they get it. Although I still can't fathom out why the French hang on to that Label Rouge. That is absolutely beyond me, but that's another story that might come up. But I think, and I did that about 5.5 years ago. I did that. I took any remaining salmon smokeries off Scottish Food Guide. In our Swedish smallholding, we're 90 meters from one of the finest wild salmon rivers, the Mörrum, in Småland, complete with ladders and tributaries to help the wild salmon navigate the hydroelectric. And it works very, very successfully. And it's a very clean environment. They also do have some freshwater farming in Sweden. So I think, rather than saying no to everything, there are things that do work, as you say, the mussels work, and some fresh water fish work, particularly when it's on a smaller scale, it's environmental, and they use the reed beds to naturally cleanse the water and the pollutants. Sweden also has a freshwater non-migratory salmon in the lakes left from the Ice Age. So that has a potential when you're not also polluting the open seas, but you're also not inhibiting what is a magnificent migratory fish. So there could be some possibilities there. And of course, there's no sea lice because it ain't salt water. Sweden banned their open net salmon farming along every bit of its coast because of the enormous environmental damage it caused. It is gone, and it's time for Scotland to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wendy. I'm very pleased that you found the unmute button. It would have been a shame to miss out on this wonderful image as well that you painted of the future that is within our reach, a future that could be more diverse, more sustainable, more beautiful, more full of life. And I think it's very important to hold that image, especially as campaigners, as a guiding star as we do this work day to day. So returning to the issues of suppliers and menus, I'm going to invite Caroline to add to the richness of this food for thought.
Lovely, thanks so much. So Soul of Discretion, I mean, I've been working with fish for 20 odd years before I started Soul of Discretion. So again, it was never a question of taking farm salmon out of Soul of Discretion. It was set up with the intention to be part of the solution for chefs and people sat at home to be able to eat more ethically sourced fish. And I came to the whole issue of salmon farming, ironically not through Scotland, but through slow food and slow fish, which Wendy will know an awful lot about as well, whereby in 2004 we met a load of fishers from all around the world. So Senegal, Mauritania, Philippines, Indonesia, lots of different fishing communities. And what was remarkable back then was to know that actually the problems that the small-scale fishers faced in the UK were pretty much identical to those that were faced globally. And we built a sort of relationship with these people. You'd see them every 2 years. And so I got to know some of the Senegalese and the Mauritanian fisher people. And in 2004, it wasn't a problem. But by 2008, they'd started to say, well, we don't have any fish left to fish any longer. The big European vessels and Chinese and Russian vessels have bought the rights to fish off our coasts, and they are hoovering up the fish on our coasts, and our little pirogues that have been traditional forms and methods of fishing for generations. I mean, it's no longer safe to go out because they're in danger of being scooped up in the massive nets of these European trawlers. But even if they did venture out, there was simply no fish there to fish. And it was one of these extraordinary things where these young fishermen, or not necessarily young, actually, they went through the generations, but they'd be fishing for maybe just 3 months of the year in the grey mullet season, and they'd be bringing that back to the shores where the women folk were processing and creating fish fillets for themselves to feed an entire coastal community. Also sort of make money out of it by sending it to the interior of the country. And then they were creating botaga, the grey mullet roe, that was a sort of big export community project going out to places, mostly Italy. And coastal communities survived of this for centuries. And within a couple of these Terra Madre slow food sessions, so from like 2008 through to 2012, this had been pretty much wiped out. And so I was seeing this fish meal basically being robbed from developing countries to go into feeding already well-fed Westerners. There was something utterly unethical and immorally bankrupt about doing this. And then it sort of feeds into this whole political thing now, whereby I think the figures for 2024 were 10,000 Africans trying to cross from Africa to the EU lost their lives in just 1 year, 10,000. And many of these now, they're thinking around about 2,000 of them may actually have been these fisher folk. So we're robbing them of an ability to make their own livelihood. These people don't want to come to Europe, but if Europeans, in their search for never-ending, ceaseless race to the bottom on cheaper and ever cheaper food, they're left with no livelihood, what choice do they have? They get on a boat and they go to that place on Instagram that looks great. Everybody's happy. So just morally bankrupt. So actually, it was that motivated me more than any other factor, I think. And then the second thing that I really felt strongly about with the farm salmon as we knew it back in the day. So the restaurant Moshi Moshi was actually Loch Duart's first customer, and we went up there and we were absolutely bamboozled by the beauty of these Scottish lakes. And you know, they treated us like kings, and to this day I remember how wonderful that trip was. You know, it was just great. And I think the two founders of that really believed that you could farm salmon better, and I think they really set out to do that. And now, of course, the consolidation in the industry is such that I think in your stats there's 6 or 7 operators of the entire thing. And I think Westeros was the last one that was sold, and that's gone to Moe, and Loch Duart now is essentially owned by the founder of eBay, as I understand it. And of course, if you're looking at, you know, if you've got kids going to the local school and you've been responsible for polluting the local loch, you're just not going to be well received in the local community. You're going to be under much more pressure to care for your local environment. But of course, a distant shareholder, what do they care? They're just looking at the bottom line. So I think the question of ownership and scale actually is something not just in farm salmon, but in the industry of food generally. It really matters. Ownership and scale are massively contributing to the outcome of the environmental and social impact. And I suppose, yeah, just this, you know, how, because the restaurant, you said you hope to welcome us to be the first off the table, and yeah, it's flipping heck, that is such a huge ask. And you know, it's not to say that I'm not up for it, and we are trying, but it is such a huge ask, and it's depressing in the sense that from the Soul of Discretion's point of view, how wild Alaskan salmon sales are probably nearly 50, they're not quite 50%, but they're getting for 50% of our total sales, when we have 50 odd species on our doorstep that we could promote and sell. and yet this one species is just so attractive to people. It's really scary. And I think for restaurants, if you're not silly enough to be running a Japanese one, and you've got 2 veg, 2 meat and 2 fish on your menu kind of thing, it should now be, if you've got that commitment, it's not a difficult thing for you now to be sourcing ethically. Choose by method of catch rather than species, and you can get it right. If on a Japanese menu where you're serving 20 odd different species, and many of them you can't use in sushi, so you can't use a cod or a pollock or something, you've got to use turbot or brill or something of that nature. And I looked to the southwest where we're from, and most of those fish are caught with beam trawlers, which we don't sell in Soul of Discretion because they are so massively environmentally damaging. Plus, I would argue, maybe a bit provocatively, that they promote modern day slavery. So many of these boats from Brixham are run by Ghanaians, Sri Lankans, the Ghanaians that lost their own livelihood thanks to our salmon farms have come here. So it's not an easy jump. I feel like I'm jumping from the frying pan into the fire. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Yeah, questions around for everybody to answer. But yeah, thanks very much. I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I appreciated how you address these issues head on, like these difficult decisions and difficult choices. And I don't think it is provocative to talk about modern slavery on ships. It is an issue in the fishing industry. And, addressing that international perspective and the systems perspective that are causing these problems. And we could, of course, argue that the small scale fishers around the coast of Scotland and England have much more in common with small scale fishers on west coast of Africa and Mauritania than they do with the European multinationals that are making all the money from these projects. So I really appreciate you bringing those subsistence fishers into the conversation. It's a story that we don't hear often enough about how that supply chain stretches all the way across the globe and harms people both here in the UK and in the other parts of the world. So thank you. Last but not least, we have Nick to tell us more about how open net salmon farming is causing harm in our waters here. Nick.
Thanks, Shonda. Yeah, and hi everyone. So my name is Nick Underdown. I'm dialing in from the Black Isle. I've quite recently joined Wildfish as Scotland Director. And my background for the past 15 years has been in environmental advocacy, an occupation that doesn't always come with a clear training manual, but does rely on a few essential ingredients, and evidence is a big part of that, teamwork and persistence. So just a quick bit of background about Wildfish. We are a charity and very much an evidence-led organisation. We have a crack squad of freshwater ecologists working directly with communities to produce high-quality data. We even have in-house legal capacity to sometimes challenge decisions by public agencies. And we run campaigns like Off the Table and undertake policy advocacy, which is rooted firmly in science. And we work across a wide range of pressures that are affecting our wild fish populations. I first followed the work of Wildfish, which was then called Salmon and Trout Conservation, nearly 20 years ago as a local journalist on the Isle of Arran, reporting on environmental issues. And my first insight into the problems of salmon farming was in that role, seeing and actually smelling, lorry loads of dead farmed salmon being ferried off the island to be incinerated in Widnes in Cheshire after what had become an almost routine series of disease outbreaks at the local salmon farm. And, the farmers experiencing these high mortalities is something that continues to beset the Scottish industry. And it was clear that something was very, very wrong in this supply chain. I was getting tip-offs from people inside the farm about conditions, and it was a difficult story locally. There were local jobs involved, and it was a business that was once quite small scale and more community rooted, that was slowly being absorbed into this ever larger suite of corporate interests looking to maximise profits. And I think, I just like to say from the start, in all respect, Wildfish does not want to be instigating the Off the Table campaign. You know, our mission is the recovery of wild fish populations in their waters and all the ecological and cultural benefits they bring. We would prefer this problem didn't exist, but it does, and it is sadly it's growing. I think just for context, depending on where people are at on their journey of finding out about this issue, globally, farm salmon now dominates the supply of salmon to our tables. Last year, around 3 million tonnes of farm salmon was produced, compared with just 800,000 tonnes of wild salmon. And here in Scotland, the industry continues to make, you know, very inflated claims about its economic value, which is quoted now at around about 1 billion. Yet it comes with these enormous unaccounted for costs. And one independent analysis estimates that almost about $50 billion in negative environmental and social externalities have occurred since 2013. I guess, the question is, how has this happened? Salmon farming began in Scotland as a small crofting style industry, and it has just scaled so rapidly without environmental safeguards catching up. There is still no global regulatory framework governing the cumulative impacts of salmon aquaculture. And here in Scotland, unfortunately, planning and regulation have consistently failed to keep pace with the expansion of the industry. From the most basic sustainability perspective, the problems are fundamental. Shonda has outlined them already, and they are not problems that can be solved by technology. I think the one that I would, flag, we've been sort of sharing are sort of reflections on the state of things. Perhaps the most significant is the impact of genetic integration. Farmed salmon escape from these farms regularly. Our recent analysis estimates that conservatively about 3 million farmed fish, that's around 6,000 tonnes of fish, have escaped into the wild from Scottish salmon farms. And that is more than the total number of wild salmon that are currently returning to our Scottish rivers every year. These escaped fish can interbreed with wild fish, and they weaken the genetic integrity of our wild fish and reduces the resilience of those very fragile populations. And, our communities are seeing these impacts directly. We are seeing the loss of wild fish runs. We're seeing degraded ecosystems. We're seeing, visual and recreational impacts if that affects certain people. And we're seeing pollution of waters that really are our public waters. And globally, just to pick up on Caroline's point, which is a phenomenally significant one, is that salmon farming is, as Caroline mentioned, contributing to the depletion of wild stocks through the feed that is used to fatten these farm salmon. A small number of feed manufacturers are consuming a disproportionate share of the world's forage fisheries to feed this supposedly luxury product. So yeah, I'm just very humbled to be speaking alongside these fine souls from the hospitality sector, people who deliver food, but people who also shape culture and influence taste and inform people, and hopefully can help lead a discussion about how we make this change to shift the narrative away from this inevitable supposed fact that farm salmon must be on our tables.
Thank you very much, Nick, for them sort of fleshing out all the evidence base and the facts and figures around the significant harm that salmon farming creates. I also enjoyed your very visceral picture of stinking, rotten fish being carted away across the countryside. Fish that have suffered themselves and also use so many inputs, other fish and soy for food, energy, water, just to be dumped and lost. And Lloyd mentioned earlier the ban on battery farming of hens, and I doubt people would accept such lorry loads of pigs, cattle, or chickens being carted about just to be disposed of in that fashion. So it really does bring it home. Thank you very much, all of you, for your wonderful insights, your inspiring narratives, your thought-provoking comments. And we can engage and discuss more of these themes in our Q&A. If you haven't already, people dialing in, please use the Q&A function to put your questions to the panel. We do already have a couple of questions that have landed as people have been speaking. The first one, which I suggest was for Lloyd, Geety, Wendy, or Caroline, or indeed all of you. Feel free to chime in and speak up. So, from your experience, your conversations with people in the hospitality industry, so chefs, writers, restaurateurs, front of house, how much momentum do you feel there is for change in fish sourcing practices across the UK? Geety.
I think there's huge momentum. I think almost any restaurant that I come across would like to have a sustainable supply of fish, but it is virtually impossible. There are virtually no wholesalers that give you accurate information. I mean, we know that supermarkets actually serve fish. They name the species wrong. You know, they're selling fish under the wrong species. So, I mean, if supermarkets can't even create that supply chain, it is virtually impossible for restaurants. I think it's even harder for citizens, just consumers, as everyone calls them, but I'm not a consumer, I'm a citizen, and because the information is even harder to get hold of off your fishmonger or the supermarket, and you end up with MSC, which isn't good enough and nowhere near good enough. So the only way to do it is to buy directly off a fisher and find the right fisher and buy directly off them. And that is what we've managed to achieve. I imagine Lloyd has managed to achieve that in Scotland as well, but it can be incredibly hard thing to do. But like I say, we're in an incredibly powerful position to educate people. So, and like Caroline pointed out, if you have a simple daily change in menu, it is so simple not to have unethical fish on your menu. But the supply chain is incredibly hard. It's a constant battle.
Yeah, I completely agree. Absolutely. Like for me to get, use the comparison to meat, for me to get like a decent pigs or cow or sheep, whatever, it's so easy for me to call someone and have a conversation and get something that I know exactly where it's from, and I know who's driven it to the abattoir, who's picked it up, and who's dropped it off in the restaurant. For fish, I got one fish supplier I use only, and him and I have conversations weekly about where it's from and how it's fished and what it is and what's best and what's not. And even sometimes he's like, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
Like, and he's buying it. It's really hard. There needs to be like, for this to get better, there needs to be more accountability, and there needs to be it needs to be better. The whole system just needs to be better.
Legally, we are all entitled, as by EU legislation, which was brought into the UK, to be given the information on how your fish was caught. That is enshrined in law. It is quite extraordinary how difficult it is for it to happen. But I would say, to chefs, we of course trace back on our pack to every single boat with the name of the fishing vessel and the method of catch. That's part of what we do. That's why I set up Soul of Discretion, to be able to give that choice to people sat at home wanting to eat fish ethically. But for chefs, it's a whole different matter, because I have yet to find chefs who are, and this is a challenge to you all, happy to take frozen fish of varying sizes on a regular basis and be able to work with that. And if you are insistent on only buying from the low impact vessels, then there will be weeks like last week, they just didn't go out. It was too windy. And so if you want a well-caught fish, by my definition being the low impact ones, that's open to debate, of course, you've got to accept that at some point either you don't have fish on your menu or it will have been frozen. And most chefs don't want that. And most suppliers don't have the capacity to offer that. So I think you've got to get the issue of size. You could have the same species, but some might be that big and some might be that big. But guess what? Chefs all want them to be that big. That's a challenge to you all. And then you could have this whole thing about, well, when was it caught? Was it caught from a low impact vessel, even though the gale was blowing? Probably not. So yeah, it's hard. And even so, just to answer your thing on, you're asking your fish suppliers, when the auction was available in Plymouth, we knew all the time which vessel we were buying from. Even us, as first-time buyers off the Brixham market, because it gets transported from Brixham to Plymouth, If we bought 5 kilos off that boat and 10 kilos off that, to minimize the transport, rather than having a crate of undersized fish, they chuck it all together. So while I know that I've bought from 3 vessels, I can know, even I, as the first registered buyer, can no longer tell you definitively, oh, that fish was from that boat. It's, you know, Brixham has stuffed us up. They really have.
And then you'll go, almost every restaurant around here in Devon will say, oh yeah, our fish comes from Brixham. Like that's it, it's solved. It's all fine because it comes from Brixham, because there's so little information. But we've been talking about off the table. Actually, what we need is a campaign for on the table, don't we? So it's a campaign to restaurants to say, eat mussels, like vary your sizes. And sometimes you've got no fish, so that's your off the table bit, which customers love. I mean, my first pub in London, 1998, we used to run out of fish all the time because we were buying off certain suppliers. And customers, when you said there were storms at sea, how do you expect small boats to go out? So there is no fish, and customers were fascinated by it, in the same way that we've educated people about seasonal vegetables and, you know, how animals are reared. You know, we have the power to change this narrative. And we can change it despite the fact that there's very little legislation, despite the fact that the corporate industries are controlling this and are not allowing the narrative to come out. We have the power to change it. I have so much faith in restaurants and how we can change food culture. I think it's a very exciting time.
Thank you. You've both given me loads of ideas. And I'm just sort of wondering about bringing that human element to people out at sea. People love the shipping forecast. Maybe we need to do a follow-up fishing forecast from the shipping forecast in a similar style to educate people that's why there's no fish tomorrow, because there was storms at sea. We have a sort of a follow-up question, actually, which is, do you think it's an information problem that's stopping people from changing, or what are the barriers? I mean, we talked about lack of information, and certainly as a, you know, enthusiastic, conscious citizen home cook, I do find it very, very hard to work out what I'm eating all the time and where it's from. I can spend hours researching and then give up and then go and make something else. I heard a colleague tell us about a door-to-door fishmonger telling customers that their salmon was wild line-caught Atlantic salmon. Clearly misinformation.
I think it's a propaganda issue rather than an information issue.
Okay. So information propaganda, what are these barriers?
It's definitely an information issue. So the Marine Conservation Society, fantastic. You know, I have massive support for them. They have a traffic light system on fish. So it might be mackerel at this time of year by this method. How do you get that information? No one really has it. You know, back to what Caroline was saying. And then how do you, as a citizen, question the fish on the menu? Where's your mackerel caught? Where's it from? How do you know the answer that you're looking for? So we're in this continual loop of, we don't know how to ask because we're not fishers. We don't get it. We don't understand the stock levels, and the customer doesn't know how to challenge us. So we sit in this place of utter silence, just hoping that someone's telling us the truth. And the vast majority of the time, they are not telling us the truth. I mean, sustainably caught fish from Brixham is on every menu around here, and it's bullshit. It's a lie. So actually, if we go to the absolute starting point of this is truth. So if everyone was forced to tell the truth about their claims, then we would sidestep this problem very, very fast. Now, you used to be able to go to trading standards and say to them, you know, these people are saying their fish is sustainable. Can you check it out? And they actually would, and they actually would hold you to account. They would actually force you to be honest about it. But that's not the case anymore. They've had their funding completely decimated. So there are just lies everywhere on menus. So yeah, I'm afraid it is a major information issue. And until the government starts to hold business to account instead of thinking that the free market will solve the problem, then we are pretty much, sorry to say it, fucked.
Thank you, Katie. Lloyd, you started to talk about propaganda, and I wonder whether you and maybe Wendy can chip in. Wendy, as a writer, probably is in the receiving end of lots of propaganda as people wanted to write about certain things.
I mean, go to any supermarket and look at salmon and there's propaganda.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Anything, a chicken, a cow, anything. I mean, 80% of our pigs are bred indoors. now in Britain, in massive 10,000 pigs, and no one knows that. The supermarkets aren't telling you that. Sorry, I'll stop talking. Sorry.
It's always wonderful to hear from you.
I agree with all the panelists are saying, and it really is a huge problem. And the large corporate voice is loud. And so we have to really keep pushing and be loud and try all sorts of our own sort of lateral thinking tactics to raise awareness, because they are a very loud voice in it. And I think there is this business of, you know, the frogs in the water while it gets warmer and warmer, and then one day they don't realize that they're dead. And I do think that there's a lot of that with, particularly as you said, the citizens. I do like that, Geeti. I'm going to stick with that one. That the citizens, you know, really haven't, with respect to them all, got a clue. You know, I spend a lot of time with farmers and chefs and people that love the food and care about the food. And I was asked by a French film company, and I often, you know, kind of point them in the direction of a chef when they're doing something foodie, because they love coming to Scotland and filming something, and they wanted friends, you know, that were domestic cooks. I had real difficulty, you know, thinking of people that I knew out with the industry who actually were cooking as sustainably as the people that I was working with on a day-to-day basis. I actually ended up sending them to 3 different farms, you know, where they were not food producers in the sense of baking or making a salami, but, you know, they had a farm kitchen and they were used to cooking, because, you know, it goes right back to schools and knowledge, and they're not getting it from colleges either. You know, putting a bit of flabby salmon, which incidentally is no luxury anyway, you know, is a quick fix in colleges and schools. And we need to change hearts and minds right back at the start, like we did so successfully with the anti-smoking campaign.
I would just add that, you know, the notion that we are going to get good traceability from our fish is such an ask. And there was a report out a couple of weeks ago, I think, that was saying 25%, you probably saw this, 25% of fish sold in supermarkets is IUU, so illegal, unreported, unregulated. And as Geeti said earlier, you know, if supermarkets can't do it, what hope has a small restaurateur got of being able to trace back for the most part of it? So yeah, it's tough, really tough. I suspect legislation has to change it. I don't think it's just not fair to expect a chef. I mean, we don't deal with chefs because we're always on the flipping phone to them. You know, one question leads to another 10. And we just don't have the manpower to deal with chefs. That it's too difficult. So yeah, it's not an easy one.
Can I ask Caroline a question? Do you think, Caroline, it is possible to make all fish traceable? I mean, do we have the technology? Could we?
So I reckon Nick might be better placed to do that. But there are things out there that we're looking for with the participatory guarantee scheme, and I can never pronounce it. Abodi, something like that. I found it through Slow Food. It was a South African technology where it's designed for small scale fishers to trace back from their boats to the wherever, be it the fish buyer or the person eating it at home. So it is possible. I would say, given that the legislation is already out there that dictates by the EU, because people required it, right? They wanted it of their fish. They wanted to know how their fish was caught. That legislation came in. The industry went out of its way to avoid having to do it by, or not even avoid, to be deliberately duplicitous by putting on a piece of fish. This fish could have been caught by pole and line, pot, trawl, dredge, whatever. It made every single method of fishing possible to mankind, pretty much, on the packaging to get round this legislation. So rather than taking what the EU people were asking of legislators on, they went out of their way to undermine policy. And that's what you're up against in the fishing industry. At the end of the day, we're all modern day pirates in the fishing industry. We need to remember that.
If I could just come in quickly there, the technology definitely exists. It's a question of political will to implement the laws to require that technology is deployed. And that's a very boring piece of political advocacy that doesn't excite people in terms of public campaigns. But yeah, the technology exists. Many people have been, requesting that technology is made mandatory for many years now. But the industry, as Caroline said, has successfully resisted that for some practical reasons. But I think those practical reasons are now vanishing, or quickly vanishing, just because of public demand. I go on quick kind of additional reflection on this around this question around information flow, because it strikes me that the good people that take farm salmon off their menus aren't going to be communicating with their customers routinely about the fact that they've done so, because they're not going to sort of bore and evangelize about that. They want people just to experience good food, rather than saying, oh, and by the way, you didn't have this terrible food that we obviously don't stock in our restaurant.
Yeah, we only bring it up when someone asks.
Yeah. So there's a kind of information flow thing there, and I just wondered whether anyone's got a view on that, whether those who are taking a lead on this, what can be done about that?
On that note,
sorry, Shonda.
I'm just going to jump in and tell you all, unfortunately, we are running out of time. We have just 2 minutes of this session left. A very lively conversation that we obviously do want to continue. So I will just have to organise another one of these, and I hope you can all come along another time where we can continue the conversation in another setting. And I hope you'll all come and listen into the next one as well. So thank you so much, my wonderful panel, for these wonderful insights, reflections, thought-provoking ideas, big thinking, traceability, systems thinking. It's been a fantastically stimulating discussion. I've enjoyed listening to you all, and I hope everybody else has enjoyed listening to it as well. And I hope that between us, we've inspired people who are listening in to go a bit further and take farm salmon off their menus. Start making those first small steps. Don't aim for perfection. Just do something to make a start. We'd love you to join Off the Table, and in any second now, Imi will pop into the chat the web form that you can fill in to get in touch with us and to sign up to Off the Table. If you can commit to not serving farm salmon or seaweed trout, we would absolutely love to have you involved and look forward to celebrating you by publicising your restaurant on our Instagram, talking about you any way we can and having you on the directory. Thank you very, very much again, all to our panel and to you for listening in. And we hope to speak to you again another time. It's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from everybody else.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Goodbye for now.